My name is Caleb Dunn, and today I'm going to talk about some of the arguments about vaccines, and I'm going to support the pro-vaccine argument versus people that are against vaccines, and give you some reasons why you should be vaccinated versus not being vaccinated. So the first myth that we're going to talk about is that vaccines cause autism. But until 2001, some childhood vaccines included a chemical known as thimerosal, and this is a preservative that contained ethyl mercury. So it's not gone from all vaccines, but it's still present in some flu shots, but none of the vaccines routinely required for school admission contain thimerosal as a preservative in any way. And of course, mercury can cause neurological damage, but there is scientific consensus that the amount that is used in vaccines, around 50 micrograms per half a milliliter dose, is not toxic enough to really do any damage, and autism rates have continued to climb, suggesting that there's a different cause from vaccines versus something else, which more than likely is the case that you have a better understanding of the autism disease itself, leading to increased diagnoses of autism. In a comprehensive review of the research, which was conducted in 2004, they found no evidence of a connection between vaccines and autism, and this was conducted by the Institute of Medicine. And the second myth is that giving too many vaccines can overwhelm a child's immune system. Now, this argues that you can have too much of a good thing, and there's no science behind it, but there's millions of vaccines administered every year, and there are a handful of allergic reactions that do happen from vaccines, but there are severe cases that they can be so rare that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they can't calculate a statistical risk for the population. It's just too small of a number to calculate versus the actual population. And the third myth is that vaccines cause diabetes. Now, this idea relies on the flawed work of a doctor. He gathered data on a bunch of vaccines, and he didn't follow standard study protocols, and he ended up falsifying data and ended up losing his medical license. But there's no other study, including those using the same data, that could reproduce the same results that he came up with. And the CDC and the Institute of Medicine, they dismissed any possible link, but this argument ignores the fact that diabetes rates in children are climbing because obesity rates are climbing rather than the vaccines themselves. Myth number 4 is that vaccines are no longer necessary because the diseases are no longer a threat. The opposite is true in this case. Because of vaccines, diseases that once killed millions are now invisible. But if just a few families stop vaccinating, the illnesses could reemerge in a community, and the diseases can be horrible. Mumps and influenza type B, they can cause meningitis, which can lead to deafness, they can lead to epilepsy, cognitive impairment, and measles can lead to blindness and death even. So some of these vaccines can cause the disease to disappear, but just a few families, if you stopped with the immunizations, this disease could come back. The fifth myth is that scientists are divided about the safety of the vaccines. By any measure of scientific consensus, there is complete agreement that vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary. There's been 12 studies that have shown that measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, every one of them say that these vaccines are safe. And there's other studies that have disproved the theory that the HIV shot is toxic. So the few dissenters that get lots of attention, but it's always the same thing. And the final myth is that aluminum vaccines is just as toxic as mercury. So aluminum, one of the most common metals in nature, it's safe in small amounts. A dose of antacid, like you have Tums, it's about 1,000 times as much as a vaccine does. And aluminum salts are used in vaccine to increase the antibody response, so they make it possible to use vaccines less often. So 10 reasons why you should be vaccinated. Vaccine-preventable diseases haven't gone away. The viruses that cause illness and death, they still exist, and they can be passed on to those who aren't protected by vaccines. Now, we live in a time where people can travel around the world in just a day, by flying, by boat. So it's not hard to see that these bacteria diseases can travel just as easily as we can now. The second reason is that vaccines will keep you healthy. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends vaccination throughout your life, and this will help protect against many different infections. And when you skip vaccines, you can leave yourself pretty vulnerable to illnesses such as shingles, influenza, and HPV, and hepatitis B, and these can be leading causes of cancer. The third reason is that vaccines are just as important to your overall health as diet and exercise. You can eat healthy foods like exercising, getting regular checkups. These vaccines play a vital role in keeping you healthy, and they're one of the most convenient and safest preventative care measures that we have available. Number 4, vaccination can mean the difference between life and death. They are preventable. Vaccine-preventable infections can be dangerous, and every year there's approximately 50,000 U.S. adults that die from vaccine-preventable diseases in the U.S. Number 5, vaccines are safe. The U.S. has the best post-licensure surveillance system in the world. They make vaccines extremely safe, and there's extraordinarily strong data for different medical investigators that all point to the safety of vaccines. And in fact, some of the vaccines are among the safest products in all medicine. Number 6, vaccines won't give you the diseases they're designed to prevent. You're not going to catch the disease from the vaccine itself. Some vaccines contain killed viruses, and this just allows your immune system to be exposed to the virus, and it's impossible to get the disease from them. Now, others do have live but weakened viruses. These are designed to ensure that you can't catch the disease. Again, this is just to get your immune system fired up, to allow them to recognize the disease and try to fight the disease if you're exposed to it again. Number 7, young and healthy people can get sick. The infants and the elderly are at a greater risk for serious infections and complications, but vaccine-preventable diseases can strike anyone, like even young adults. If you're young and healthy, you can get vaccinated, and it can help you stay that way. Number 8, vaccine-preventable diseases are expensive. An average influenza illness can last up to 15 days, typically with 5 or 6 missed work days. And adults that get hepatitis A lose an average of 1 month of work. Number 9, when you get sick, your children, your grandchildren, and your parents are at risk too. So a vaccine-preventable disease that might make you sick for a week or two, it could prove deadly for your children, your grandchildren, or your parents if it spreads to them. And when you get vaccinated, you're protecting yourself and your family. For example, adults are the most common source of the whooping cough infection in infants, and this can be deadly in infants. Now, in 2010 alone, 25 U.S. infants died from whooping cough. And number 10, your family and your coworkers need you to be healthy. In the U.S. each year, there's millions of adults that get sick from vaccine-preventable diseases, and this can cause them to miss work. It can leave them unable to care for those who depend on them, including their children, and it can also include some of the parents that are getting elderly. And those are the arguments for vaccines and some of the reasons why you should get vaccinated.